Hi, I'm Zephyr, and I wrote The Adventure of It All, which is available on Amazon. I'm reading chapter by chapter. This is part 1, chapter 3, Plans. People told me for a few months that I was handling everything so well. They were all surprised at how well I was doing, but I wasn't doing well. I had things to do, places to go, a life to live. How was I supposed to grieve properly? I was struggling to deal with school. Thank goodness I don't work. I failed my first class in 2 years. My memory was something that I started to have issues with. I couldn't remember appointments or assignments or even if I had bathed in the last week. As my mother's death became more real, I would have episodes where I would become incapacitated by grief, and my body would be racked by sobs. I spent 2 weeks with a friend in Idaho, which helped ground me. About a month after my mom had died, my grandmother called me. "There's a letter here about your mom, something about an insurance policy or a retirement fund," she said in her gentle voice. She still had a strong hint of a southern drawl, despite having lived in the Pacific Northwest since the 70s. I wanted to know what she was talking about. As far as I knew, my mom didn't have life insurance and was on Social Security. She also got a $50 retirement check from working for the state for 10 years. If my mom had a retirement fund, wouldn't she get more than $50 a month? I went to my grandparents' house and read the letter. My mom did have a retirement fund, more money than I had ever seen in my life. I called Social Security about it because I'm on disability benefits. I was told that from the moment I received that money, I had 2 months to spend it before they took my benefits away. That would have been fine if $30,000 were enough to live on for the rest of my life, but it's not. That left me with 2 months to do what is called a spin down. I've seen many friends get large settlements from Social Security back pay to inheritances. I myself got a back pay of $10,000 in 2013 when I was approved for Social Security benefits after a 6-year-long fight for approval. I had seen how so many of my friends had blown through their money through a spin down, which left them with nothing. Yes, they'd had a good time getting tattoos and eating out, but what did they have to show for it other than a tattoo that was filled with more regret than ink? I used my back pay to buy a mobile home to live in. It was a smart decision, but also a stupid one. My mobile home had a lot of problems, and it became very unhealthy to live in, so I sold it for a third of what I paid for it. 2 years after I bought it, what did I have? A new laptop for school and a bit of money to move into a small studio apartment downtown. I wanted to do something different, something better with the money my mom left me. I wanted the money to go to the best possible thing, something I could keep forever, something I could cherish. I wanted to do something in honor of my mom's spirit. I knew almost instantly. I was going to take some of her ashes to Paris. My mom loved the idea of Paris, from the Eiffel Tower to the Seine River to the romance that it all seemed to represent. My mom was in love with the idea of romance and love. She always had been. She also never had the ideal relationship. Her first love was unrequited. Her second was a fling that created me. And her third was my stepfather. He ended up dying in prison. Then there was her last attempt at love, but he's now in prison for murder. Paris symbolized all of my mom's hopes and dreams, so it was only fitting that her ashes were able to go there. But then, if I was going to go to Paris, why not London? It was so close. There's even a train that connects them. And if I'm going to London, why don't I go to Scotland and Ireland and Wales? A week or two long trip became a month of adventure around Paris, Ireland, and the UK. Europe had always been just a fairy tale to me. I knew it existed, but it's hard to truly believe in something unless you see it for yourself. I always dreamed of doing a lot of things I did and seeing a lot of the places I saw, but growing up poor made it hard to really believe that it could actually happen. But then there was the issue of my mobility. I used a walker, and there was no way I was going to be able to walk around enough, even with my walker, to go anywhere overseas. I would need to figure out a solution, and a solution I found. I discovered that there are foldable mobility scooters that are meant for traveling. I found one that allowed my weight, went 12 miles on a charge, and could fold up as small as a carry-on suitcase. I ordered it in a metallic light blue. Getting my passport was exciting too. I couldn't order it as far in advance as I should have, so it was a bit nerve-wracking. I did get my passport after just a few weeks though, so I was lucky. I took a selfie the moment I opened the envelope with my passport. I couldn't believe it. Passports were a symbol of something that was always way out of my reach. That was no longer the case. Not only did I have a passport, but I was going to have stamps in it very soon. When I booked my flights, I discovered that the cheapest ones had long layovers, almost 24 hours, in my choice of Germany or Turkey. I chose Istanbul, Turkey. I knew nothing about that area of the world. One of the first things I read about when looking up Istanbul was the triple bombing of the airport just months before I booked my tickets. Bombing? Yes, apparently there was a terrorist attack. Terrorists? Yes, there are multiple terror groups that have been targeting Turkey. I looked Turkey up on a map and realized that technically it's in the Middle East. Turkey also borders Syria. This was when this war in Syria was filling every form of media. I realized just how close to all of that I was potentially going to be. How close I was actually going to be. Because my tickets were bought, and they were business class, so I was absolutely going to go. I had nightmares all night that night. The next day, I continued my research. I found a video by Rick Steves about Istanbul, during which he visited the Grand Bazaar. It was incredible looking, and became my main focus for Istanbul. I wanted to see the Grand Bazaar so much. I was also interested in the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. When my new mobility scooter was delivered, I was beside myself. I tore the box open and almost broke myself trying to assemble it. I plugged it in to charge for a while. I couldn't wait to try it. I named it Wanderlust. Later that afternoon, I unplugged the scooter and decided to test it out by going to check the mail, which was too far from my apartment for me to walk, even with my walker. Unfortunately, I barely made it back to my apartment before the scooter died. I checked and it was fully charged, so it shouldn't have died by going only one block. I called the place I bought it from, and they asked me a couple of questions before telling me that they'd have to send me a new one. I was concerned because I only had a couple of weeks before I needed to leave. Would the new scooter arrive on time? What if it malfunctioned too? All I could do was wait. My new mobility scooter came about a week before my trip. I let it charge overnight, but at 5 a.m. I couldn't wait any longer. It said that it was fully charged. And as far afraid of the dark as I am, I decided to take it for a test ride, further than the mailbox. I was going to go to the grocery store a mile away. Was that the smartest idea? No, but I didn't have much time to waste. I needed to take the risk. Going from my apartment to the grocery store in late March, before the sun was even up, was cold. Wanderlust II, as I named her, could go up to 6 miles per hour, which meant that I arrived at the grocery store half frozen, but ecstatic and still very nervous. I had never been out in a public place on a mobility scooter, especially one that didn't look like a traditional one. Would I be judged? I knew I shouldn't care what anyone else thought, but I did. My trip around the grocery store, I decided to buy a few things while I was there, was largely uneventful. I was limited to what I could fit in the small basket on the front of the handlebars, and at one point while leaning forward, I accidentally pressed my horn, which was far louder than any mobility scooter horn needed to be. It made a nearby employee jump and clutch their chest. With my breakfast and a frappuccino tucked into my basket, I headed back home. I decided to take a different route, though. The feeling that coursed through me as I rushed down the sidewalk as just a hint of light arose above the trees around me could only be described as freedom. For the first time that I could remember, I was free. I no longer needed to stay inside my apartment, dependent on rides from others. I could see myself taking the city bus. I could see myself going, on a whim, anywhere. There was hope in my heart, and when I got home, I was sad to be home, but I was also very cold. Preparing for my trip to Europe went smoothly. I created an itinerary in Microsoft Excel and sent copies to friends. One friend in particular offered to be my contact person. Basically, I would check in with her as I reached each place. She was the only one who not only had my itinerary, but the contact information for every airline and hotel that I had booked with. She also had my grandparents' contact information in case of an emergency. I got vaccinated against hepatitis A and typhoid after my grandfather had suggested that I looked into what vaccines I might need. That hadn't even occurred to me. I didn't think of Europe as being a place where vaccines were needed, but Turkey is. I continued to test Wanderlust II, taking her on buses and running errands. The horn was easy to accidentally hit, so I ended up embarrassed more than a few times. Packing should have been done further in advance than the day and night before I left, but I'm a hopeless procrastinator. I also could barely sleep, if I did at all. My bedroom floor was covered in piles of clothing. A friend of mine came over and helped me fill the packing cubes I'd bought online as tight as possible. I knew I would need to do laundry during my trip, but I wanted to take as many clothes as possible. I had bought a new set of luggage, bright orange. One large suitcase for checked luggage, and one small suitcase for carrying on. I also packed a backpack as my personal item. Wanderlust II had a pull-out metal luggage rack on the back, which fit the small suitcase perfectly. I could wear the backpack and pull along the big suitcase. It wasn't perfect, but as long as I went slowly, I could do it. Now, my itinerary. On March 31st, I flew from SeaTac Airport in Seattle to Chicago, and then Chicago to Istanbul. On April 1st, I had a long layover in Istanbul, and then I flew to Dublin, Ireland. April 2nd, I arrived in Dublin. April 3rd to the 8th, I went on a tour of Ireland with Paddy Wagon Tours, which I highly recommend. They were amazing. They are not wheelchair accessible, though, but with a mobility scooter that folded up, it could go underneath the bus. And at that point in time, I was able to walk up the steps onto the bus. It was like a Greyhound bus. I wouldn't be able to do that now. Just something to consider. April 9th, I flew from Dublin to London. April 10th, I had a Stonehenge day tour. April 11th, I just spent in London. April 12th, I took a train to Edinburgh. April 13th, I went on a day tour of the Scottish Highlands and Loch Ness. It was just a one-day tour. April 14th, I took a train to London. April 15th, I spent in London. April 16th, I had a day tour of Cardiff and Caerphilly Castle in Wales. I don't know if I pronounced Caerphilly Castle correctly because Welsh is very hard to pronounce. April 17th, I took a train from London to a little town on the south coast of England called Littlehampton. I have a friend who lives there. April 18th, I took a train back to London. April 19th, I took the Eurostar train from London to Paris. From April 20th to the 29th, I spent in Paris. April 30th, I flew to Istanbul, and then I had another long layover there. April 1st, I flew to Chicago, and flew home. It doesn't say on the itinerary in the book, but there was a bit of an issue. I ended up having to stay a night in Chicago before I flew home, but that'll be later. I don't want to do spoilers. Stay tuned for part 1, chapter 4, Takeoff, where I actually fly out of SeaTac, which was terrifying.